Hope in Darkness is a podcast that addresses sensitive topics, including torture, abuse, and human rights violations. This episode will also address domestic abuse. Listener discretion is advised.
I wake up to just a gun being shoved onto my foot. I look up and there was an AK-47 just pointed right in my face.
Summer 2016, just 2 weeks after traveling to Venezuela to get married, Josh Holt woke up to a living nightmare. Armed, uniformed men knocked on the door of the Caracas apartment belonging to his wife, Thamy, burst in, and told Josh to give them his phone and come along. Josh had been taken from the apartment by members of a controversial anti-crime group called the OLP, Operation for the Liberation and Protection of the People. Officers took him outside to a waiting truck, stuck him in the back, and then drove up the mountain from his wife's hilltop apartment. Thamy was left alone with her 2 daughters.
The police take Josh, and one of them told me, "Stay here."
It was an order she immediately ignored. She ran downstairs from her second-story apartment to chase after the truck. And when the vehicle got too far ahead, she spent the next few hours racing through her neighborhood, asking anyone she met.
"You know where the gringo is?"
The officers first took Josh not to a police station, but to a construction site where they taunted him and went through his phone.
And they put me up against the wall and they said, "Stay right there." And so then they all kind of gathered together and they were all laughing and talking. And I didn't know what was going on. Then all of a sudden they all kind of lined up looking at me. They pointed their guns at me. And they all started just dry firing their weapons. And this is the point where I thought, I'm going to die today. One of these police officers is going to have a bullet in their gun.
But no one did. Instead, they moved him to another nondescript location not far from Thamy's apartment.
They took me out of the back of the bed and they put me up against the wheel of the truck. And I just remember bullets hitting the truck and flying by, and I was just thinking, what is going on? Like, I felt like I was literally in war without a gun and without an idea of what was going on around me.
After 30 minutes or so, the OLP once again put Josh back in the bed of the truck.
And then all of a sudden, out of nowhere, I see my wife from up the hill walking down the hill.
Thamy had finally found him.
And I could just see the tears coming out of her eyes and the sad look on her face.
I walk beside Josh, but I can say hi around the truck. Was like 7 or 5 cops.
And she just mouthed
a quiet, "I love you."
And I just mouthed back to her, "I love you." And I just kept watching her. She just kept walking down the hill.
Once Thamy walked away, Josh was handed over to the custody of a new group of policemen and put in a Jeep with 4 officers, 3 men and a woman. It had been 5 hours since he was first taken from Thamy's apartment. And just as the Jeep was prepared to take him down the mountain for the final time, Thamy reappeared.
And my wife got into the middle of the road and just stopped.
And I don't let the car go.
And I'm just thinking, oh my heck, you crazy woman, what are you doing? And so the lady officer gets out and goes up to her screaming at her, "What do you want? What are you doing?" And she goes, "That's my husband that's in that car." And he goes, "That's your husband?" And she goes, "Yeah."
"You want to be with your husband?" "Yes."
So then they threw her into the car with me. And I'm just thinking, you idiot, what are you doing? Now you're in here with me.
I'm Becky Bruce, and this is Hope in Darkness, Episode 2, Thamara. In this episode, we'll learn more about Thamy's life in Venezuela. We'll discuss how where she was living may have had an impact on the couple's fate, and learn just how much she was willing to bear for her new husband. Because Thamy is more comfortable speaking Spanish, at times, you'll hear her thoughts through a translator. That's after the break. Thamara Belén Caleño Candelo was born in Ecuador but moved to Venezuela when she was 5. As a result, she says she often felt like an outsider. Her middle school principal, in just one example, tried to kick her out of school over immigration paperwork. She was fiercely defended by her single mother, Maria, who worked 6 days a week to care for Thamy, her older sister, and younger brother. When she was a teenager, Thamy became a mother herself. At 17, she got pregnant with her first child, Marian.
That year was so hard for me. Marian's dad, he told me, I don't see you in my future.
Thamy was raised in the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, but she quit going after her pregnancy, finding church wasn't as friendly as it used to be. Still, she finished school, skipped maternity leave, and went right back to work after her daughter was born. Her grandmother helped to care for the baby while she was working. And on top of her teen pregnancy, Thamy soon found herself the head of the household.
Mi mamá siempre fue una mamá trabajadora. Ella nunca estuvo en casa.
My mom was always a working mother. She was never at home. She worked from 6 to 6. She only came home to bathe, eat, and sleep. The next day was the same. Every day was the same, even on Saturdays. And we had to go to church in the mornings, then home in the afternoon. But Mom slept Sunday afternoons. Then it was my older sister and I who cared for my brother.
Cuidábamos a mi hermano, era mi hermana mayor y yo.
By the time Thamy became pregnant, her mother had started dating the man who would become Tammy's stepfather.
Estaban a punto de casarse, tenían planes de matrimonio. Entonces,
They were about to get married. They had plans to get married. So I suppose the fact that I got pregnant was the key for her to decide to leave. I suppose that the fact that she left the house was a way to let me know it's your responsibility. It's your pregnancy. It's your child. You don't need anything else from me. That's my thought.
es mi pensar.
Taking care of her younger brother made Tammy's life much more difficult.
She left me alone in her house, and I take care of my little brother, my baby, and I.
How old was your brother?
I was 17, he's 15.
That's a lot of responsibility for a teenager.
Yeah, and he did drugs, and he hit me and pushed me when, I don't know how to say it, drogado.
That is, when he was high.
Mi mamá no se llevó a mi hermano porque mi hermano tenía problemas de droga. Y mi padrastro.
My mom didn't take my brother with her because he had drug problems. And my stepfather didn't want anything to do with that. She preferred her husband over us. My brother had drug problems and needed help with that. But he also couldn't be helped. Then it's something very difficult to explain. I don't defend it, but I see both sides.
Sí veo ambos lados.
In spite of what she calls her difficult youth, Thamy persevered. She went to school to become an instrument technician and got a job at a hospital. There, she met her first husband, Jose. They had a second daughter together, Natalia, nicknamed Natty. She even rejoined her church.
Now I'm married. The people can talk bad stuff of me. So I'm good now. I can go back.
But it was far from happily ever after. Jose had a drinking problem.
That relationship was so abusive. So he sent me to the hospital every weekend. And he hit me with a belt like a little kid.
And like many women in abusive relationships, she stuck around. How long were you with Natty's dad?
Like 5 years.
Thamy tried to kick Jose out repeatedly. But every time she kicked him out, he came back. One time, he even kicked down the door. In the last few months of their relationship, she says that things with Jose did get better. He'd stopped drinking. He was a better husband. Until one weekend in 2015, when he decided to go out with his friends. Late at night, Thamy got a phone call. The voice on the other end told her Jose was in a horrible accident and needed help right away. But he had a history. she wasn't sure she could trust it.
And at 3 a.m, I received a call and told me, okay, your husband passed away. And no, you are joking. And I hang up the call.
Then, around 7 a.m., a final call from the morgue.
They take me a cool room and pull up a tray, and he was there. So cold, alive. I feel so bad because I could done something for him, and I didn't.
Jose was 26. Thamy was a 24-year-old widow with 2 girls to take care of. Sometime later, Thamy went to the temple and prayed for God to put a good man in her life. Within months, she connected with Josh Holt on Facebook. Outside of her tumultuous personal life, Thamy had to deal with other calamities. She was twice dislocated from her home due to natural disasters. The first was in 1999, when flash floods and landslides killed tens of thousands of people in the mountains around Caracas. The second involved more landslides in 2010, while she was pregnant with Natty.
Tuve que salir por mi propia seguridad. Porque mi casa quedaba.
I had to leave for my own security because my house sat in front of a mountain. If the mountain fell, I didn't have a way to get out of my house. The government destroyed my house. They sent a construction team and tore it down, took it down to the walls. They gave me an apartment for compensation, an old house for a new house, a house that put me in danger for one that gave me security, supposedly.
Seguridad, supuestamente.
Thamy's new apartment was located in a housing complex known as Ciudad Caribia. This was a passion project of longtime President Hugo Chavez, who wanted to revolutionize housing in Venezuela. When he was first elected in 1998, Chavez promised to make life better for the Venezuelan poor. His Bolivarian Revolution, named after the man who liberated much of South America from Spain in the 19th century, was meant to relieve suffering and minimize inequality. In many ways, Ciudad Caribia represented what Chavez envisioned his country could be. Like a lot of socialist leaders, he had a 6-year plan, one that would share the wealth broadly so that everyone would prosper and live better lives. It hinged on the country's rich oil fields. How it worked out in reality was nothing like the dream. The housing complex, made up of over a dozen multi-story apartment buildings, was built on a cleared mountaintop outside Caracas. Its construction was lauded by Chavez as a monumental achievement in a 2011 appearance on his talk show, Aló Presidente.
Aló Presidente, número 370.
Literally, hello, Mr. President. Every week, Chavez took to the airwaves to explain his policies, goals, and achievements, sometimes speaking unscripted for up to 8 hours at a time. Ciudad Caribia was, in his mind, one such accomplishment. He called it a socialist city.
Con escuela, sitios para la recreación, todo. Un complejo integral.
With a school, a place for recreation, a totally integrated complex, not unlike many planned communities you might find here in the United States. In his vision, Ciudad Caribia would be the first of many of these homes, especially for Venezuelans affected by natural disasters, like Thamy.
Tener un apartamento, una buena vivienda, eso es tener poder desde el punto de vista esencial de la vida.
That is, to have an apartment, to have a good place to live, was empowering. After his death in 2013, Chavez left a visible mark on Ciudad Caribia. One of its buildings is tagged with the leader's distinctive signature in bright red paint, an H, followed by a flourish, and Chavez underneath in all caps. Many of Thamy's neighbors were Chavistas, supporters of Chavez and his Bolivarian ideals.
Te puedo decir que un 90% apoyaban a Chavez.
Thamy says that 90% of her neighbors were Chavez backers. The other 10% kept their opinions to themselves.
tú no podías decir, a mí no me gusta Chávez.
You couldn't say, I don't like Chavez, because that was how you became a target.
Y las personas empezaban a atacarte, a ofenderte, a romperte las ventanas.
People would attack you or offend you, break your windows. There was a woman who, in the city supermarket, said, "Death to Chavez and to his cabinet." And she later found the glass in her windows broken.
Y ella encontró los vidrios de sus ventanas rotos. La gente le lanzó piedras a su casa.
People threw rocks at her house.
How did you feel about all of that?
I don't like, because I don't support the Chavism.
Thamy wasn't a Chavista. She says that she did live rent-free in Ciudad Caribia for over 6 years, but she was not a Chavez loyalist. Her ambivalence was noted by some of her more politically active neighbors. One woman even tried to get her kicked out of the complex.
Could she have had you removed? Is that a possibility?
Yes.
Just for being a political opponent?
Yes.
Josh arrived at Ciudad Caribia on June 11th, 2016. Josh and Thamy were arrested on the 30th. It's difficult to know whether or not Tammy's political leanings had anything to do with their run-in with the OLP. Even if that wasn't a factor, Chavez was outspokenly anti-American throughout his presidency. We'll talk about the reasons why on our next episode. An apartment complex full of Chavistas would have definitely noticed Josh's presence as a white American, as a gringo. Really, there are two possibilities. The OLP raided the apartment complex simply because they were cracking down on crime as part of their mission. Or someone ratted Josh and Thamy out, perhaps out of loyalty, or in exchange for favor from Nicolas Maduro's regime. When the OLP showed up at her apartment on June 30th, Thamy wasn't about to let them steal away the man she believed was the answer to her prayers.
I know how is the cop in my country. They are a bad person. They don't care nothing about you. If they want money, they ask you for money.
That's why she ran frantically through her neighborhood, yelling for Josh, and when she found him, stood in the middle of the road and refused to let the police go by.
You want to be with your husband? Yes.
Thamy was put in the back of the car and immediately separated from her husband. Josh was taken away in the truck, and Thamy was taken back to her Ciudad Caribia apartment, where the officers began a thorough search of the residence. By that time, Tammy's mother had arrived. Thamy had called her to look after her daughters while she searched for Josh. Thankfully, her mother had told Natalia and Marian, who were just 4 and 7, to stay in their room. I asked Thamy if the girls were afraid.
No, las niñas estaban viendo televisión.
No, they were watching TV and didn't notice anything strange going on. But Thamy did have to sit by as the police went through her things. They rifled through drawers and cabinets before turning to Josh's computer.
You know the password? I say yes. Can you give me the password? Yes.
The OLP officers went through Josh's files and took his hard drive, then demanded to see Josh's suitcase. Right before his arrest, the police had demanded the same thing of Josh.
It's upwards of 10 police officers. And the first thing that they say to me is, "Where is your suitcase?" Yeah, what kind of question is that?
Thamy led the officers to her bedroom, opened the bag, and shook out its contents.
So they told me, okay, go away and let us do our job.
This would turn out to be a critical moment for the Holts. Within minutes, Thamy says she heard one of the officers yell,
"Hey, boss, come here and look what I found."
She ran to the balcony of her second-floor apartment. From there, she could see into the bedroom. Thamy says she saw an officer in white gloves holding up a grenade. A grenade that was not there when she shook out the contents of Josh's suitcase just a few minutes earlier. The officers forced her mother and the girls out of the apartment, leaving Thamy alone with the police. They aimed their guns at her, pulled her hair, and threw her on the ground, demanding to know why she had a grenade in her home. Thamy told them,
I don't have a grenade in my house. You put the grenade in my house. I was so mad and I was crying a lot. And I was so scared and so nervous. So I stopped talking with them.
The OLP officially arrested her. Thamy didn't know it, but she would soon be reunited with her husband. That's after the break. Josh had been taken 13 miles down the mountain into Caracas to a prison known as El Helicoide.
And the whole entire time we were driving there, I was super nervous. I didn't know what was going on, what to expect. And I think that the police officers that were there with me were kind of around the same thing, not knowing exactly what was going on. But they were trying to comfort me at the same time.
They even stopped to buy him drinks and empanadas.
We just kind of were sitting in the vehicle as I was waiting. And I was just with one officer, and the officer was like, dude, don't worry. It helped calm me down. I didn't think that there was going to be a lot of issues. I thought, this is going to be a weird day. That's what kind of started going through my mind.
Once inside the prison, Josh was met by a sergeant.
And he just started saying that I was in trouble. He said, you're in big trouble. You've done a lot of bad things. I don't know why you think that you can be here and that you can do these things here in Venezuela, and just started going on me. And I was confused. I didn't understand what was happening. I said, no, what are you talking about? I haven't done anything wrong.
The sergeant started going through Josh's phone. Then another sergeant, one who spoke English, arrived, and the interrogation began in earnest.
Not only was he saying that I was a bad person, but then he started saying that I did all these bad things. He started talking about my weapons.
Josh and his family are hunters. And like many people in the American West, Josh was a gun owner. The sergeant showed Josh his own Instagram account, where Josh had shared pictures of ammunition he'd recently bought at a gun show, and a video of himself shooting at a range.
And he said, where were you practicing here in Venezuela? I said, where was I practicing here in Venezuela? He says, yeah, you were shooting here in Venezuela, training people. And I said, no, I wasn't.
The sergeant pressed on, asking Josh if he had guns in Venezuela.
I don't have guns here in Venezuela. In fact, I've never seen a gun here in Venezuela other than what your officers have, and I've never touched a gun here in Venezuela.
The officer demanded Josh hand over his bank information and social security number. Josh knew that sounded fishy and refused. The sergeant got angry.
And then he started threatening my family. Not my family here in the United States, but the family there in Venezuela. My wife and my daughters, her family. They would tell me that I wouldn't see him again. They would tell me that they would show me pictures that would make me cringe.
And that's what got Josh talking.
After being interrogated by this guy for probably an hour to 2 hours, eventually my wife showed up and turned and looked at me. And she just had that look once again on her face. The look of being scared. The look of she's been crying. And you could just see her eyes were all red. And as I looked at her, she just looked at me and said, Joshua, they put a grenade in our apartment, and they're saying that it's ours. And I remember throwing my wallet down on the table and just saying, this is bullshit.
Josh was put in handcuffs for the first time, and he and Thamy were led to another room.
And it was kind of like a storage room for broken things, computers, refrigerators. There were ovens, there were chairs, broken chairs.
Broken stuff, and by Tammy's count, 17 other people, all lined up along the wall.
They put my wife with the other women that were in the room, and then they put a chair in the middle of the room, and that's where they handcuffed me to, which I thought was kind of weird. They handcuffed me to a chair while everyone else is standing up against the wall.
We spent like 10 hours in that room.
All the people that were in there started talking about me, saying, hey, you're American, so they can't treat you bad. You need to ask for water. You need to ask to go to the bathroom. You need to ask for this. You need to ask for that.
But the guards soon put a stop to the chatter.
Whenever they heard whispers or people talking or something, a guy would come in with a bamboo stick and he would hit people against the chest or the ribs with a bamboo stick that he thought were talking. Or sometimes they would just come in and do it to almost everybody. And one person would just put their bamboo stick up against their shoulders, shove them against the wall, as other officers would come in and just punch him in the ribs.
Periodically, guards would take some people out of the room. Then, it was Josh and Thammy's turn.
And I remember walking out there with my wife and looking at this table. They had their little flag over the table, and then on top of the flag was all of our stuff that they took away from us. They had my passport, my wife's passport. They had her driver's license, which they called cédula. They had my driver's license. They had, I love sharing this. They had my library card.
They took pictures of everything. Then photos of Josh and Thammy with their confiscated things. They were separated again.
I remember she turned and looked at me and she said, Joshua, please don't forget me. And please don't forget our children. And that's always hit me. That's always stuck with me. To think that because of a situation like this, my wife was so scared that I was going to forget her and our children. And I just looked at her and I said, don't ever think that way.
They took Josh to a room with some computers and made him sign a paper more or less acknowledging that he knew his rights. They began to interrogate him all over again.
They would ask me how I met my wife, and I'd go through the entire story of how I met my wife, how we talked on Facebook, how we met in the Dominican Republic, then when I finally went to Venezuela, then how we got married, where we got married, then what happened at the airport, then where we went to our honeymoon, then when we came back, then what we did when we came back, and then that morning. And what I didn't know was that at the same time, they were also asking my wife the same questions.
When they separate Josh and I, they take me in an office room. They was asking me the same question. Where you meet him? Why you married with him? Why him? Why you bring an American citizen in your country?
My wife was only there because I was American. And the reason they wanted her there was so that she would sign a paper stating that the grenade, all that stuff was mine.
They was telling me something like, he's a bad person. He have gun. He's a spy. And I say, no, he's not. How you know? Because I trust in him.
And she said, I'm not going to sign that because I know that that's not my Joshua. I know that he didn't do those things. My wife literally had my life in her hands. I had known this woman for just over 6 months, 7 months. And she literally could have put me away for the rest of my life just by signing that one paper.
Somehow, after everything she'd gone through, a teen pregnancy, abuse from her brother, abuse from her first husband, Thammy not only believed Josh was the answer to her prayer, she trusted him completely.
They was telling me something like, why you truth in a man you just meet?
Why do you trust a guy that you only just met?
Yes. And they start torture me.
Torturing you.
Torture me, yeah. So they take a pencil sharpener and they try to put all my fingers inside.
They took the bottom part out of the pencil sharpener. They put the pencil in to turn on the pencil sharpener, and they ran their fingers up from the bottom.
So I can feel the blades. And they take off my nails.
They only stopped, she said, because she started yelling for help. Next time on Hope in Darkness.
We're talking about 500 people who have been disappeared. We're talking about selective killings. That's when we start seeing full-blown repression.
If you or someone you know is a victim of domestic abuse, please get help. In the United States, you can call the National Domestic Violence Hotline at 1-800-799-7233 or visit thehotline.org. In an emergency, dial 911. Hope in Darkness is written and produced by me, Becky Bruce. Additional producing and editing came from Nina Ernest. Sound mixing by Trent Sell. Our executive producer is Cheryl Worsley. Original theme composed by Michael Bondmiller. Additional voice work provided by Rebecca Cressman and Alex Curie. Special thanks to Josh and Thamy Holt and their family for sharing their experiences and story. You can follow us on Twitter and Instagram at Hope Darkness Pod or online at hopedarkness.com. And your feedback is always helpful. Drop us a rating or review wherever you listen. Hope in Darkness is a KSL podcast.